All right. Well, I want to welcome all of you who are joining us live and anyone tuning into this recorded episode of Wellbeing Wednesdays at CAPS. This is episode 7, and our topic today is sex, intimacy, and mental health. Just a couple of reminders about joining us in Zoom land. If you do have questions during this session, please use the Q&A feature. It's at the bottom of your screen if you hover there. And we'd like to take live questions if you have them. Don't forget to let your friends know about these webinar episodes that are happening every Wednesday through the month of May. And you can also check out the recorded episodes at the link on this slide, just at the Campus Health webpage is where you'd find us. If you follow us on social media, especially Instagram, you will get reminders of the episodes as they're coming up from week to week. So, just to get us started, I'm Shawna Foose. I'm one of the therapists in CAPS, and I'm really excited to be joined today by our panel. And I want to let each of them introduce themselves after I fix one thing in our setting. All right. Like I said, I'm really excited. We're collaborating with our colleagues in the Well today, and so I'm going to ask my co-host to introduce herself first. Dr. Flint, if you would.
Dr. Jinaki Flint, how are you?
And I'm joined by Chelsea Hill from the Well.
Hi everyone, I'm Chelsea Hill. I use she and they pronouns.
And also by Jennifer Hunt.
Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Hunt. I use she, her, hers.
Great. So we wanted today to be a conversation about this very important topic. And we asked our community for questions. And Chelsea, I know that you got some input. But I guess I wanted to ask first, from your perspective as a health promotion specialist, why should we be talking about this?
Absolutely. So just to talk about the month that we are in, May has a lot going on. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, International Masturbation Month, and Sex Ed for All Month. And to me, they're all connected, and sexual wellness is crucial to our overall wellness. And I think focusing on Mental Health Month, though, it's never been more important than this year, especially as we are dealing with COVID-19. And for many students and adults, sexuality forms an integral part of our lives. And whether, that's expressed with a partner or with several partners or solely with ourselves, our sex life can be a source of meaning and great pleasure in our lives. So I think it's very, very important that we understand the intersections of sexual and mental health. Especially me and Jennifer are really in the process of building a sex positive community here on campus. And we think that the best way to do that is helping our students to feel it's okay to ask questions about sex and talking about mental health.
Great. Well, where should we start? What do you think the first question is?
Absolutely. So I'm going to be asking these questions from a student standpoint, but I think the question that we should start with is, as a student, what should I know about mental health and about our mental health?
In general?
In general. So sorry, in general, and then we can dive into sex. Sorry about that.
Well, I think it depends on the student, actually. I think that is a real contextual question, but I do think it can't hurt to learn about what it is and what it isn't. Oftentimes, and there's been studies done on this, that many students come to campus with this they're not psychologically savvy. Even when they have had therapy before, it has not been an education about what their emotions are, how to label them, different things about what is quote unquote mental health, because it could mean different things to different people. And you only hear about it when you don't have good mental health, right? So to stay on top of what is that actually, and what does that mean for me? And is it even a source of health? Is it an emotional distress that I'm in, right? Because oftentimes there's a stigma about mental health as well, meaning something's wrong or you need something to fix that, right? It becomes very kind of medicalized or disease oriented. So I think knowing not so much about what it is as to what you are feeling and what you're experiencing, I would go there first in terms of the emotional well-being. Am I emotionally well? How do I detect that in my body? You want to add to that, Shawna?
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree, and I would only add that I think mental health is just one facet of our overall well-being. I think sometimes in Western culture, we kind of put things in these boxes and categories, and we're kind of all one big thing. We're body, mind, and spirit, and I think that leads into kind of then the way our mental health impacts our sexual health, but that it can be viewed separately, mental health, but it should be viewed as part of the whole.
Right. And that's a good point, Shawna, because oftentimes people take that mental health to mean just what's here, right? But it is body, mind, spirit, and I always say psyche as well.
Yeah.
And they kind of cut off the head from the rest of the body, and they don't understand that there's a full body here, and it's a body-mind system. They operate in different ways, but they're one total holistic being.
Yes.
Absolutely. So let's talk about, what does sex have to do with mental health then?
Many things.
Agreed.
Start off with, let's talk about, first of all, sex is, talk about splitting off the head from the body, but this is where they both get split off, because oftentimes people see sex as something that is body oriented, or something that you do with the body, or something that's being done with the body. But a lot of the associations are actually brain connected. So a lot of what happens in sex happens in the brain. There's many chemicals that are released. You have dopamine, which is the kind of reward motivation center that kind of gets you going. There's also the endorphins, which is the natural pain and stress relievers. You have oxytocin, which is the cuddle hormone, that kind of feel good social engagement piece. So those are the first things that happen. It's good for things like anxiety and depression. It helps you manage that. And there are also many studies done on this. And also, it can also help you sleep, because orgasm pushes this hormone called prolactin, right? And the prolactin kind of helps you mellow out. I think in the early days they would talk about this only in relationship to men having a refractory period, right? I know in the 80s that was like a big deal, like why men fall asleep. And now that things are more, they're much more than they were in the 80s, equalized. They're finding that happens in everyone. There's studies done on female orgasm that shows that in the female, whether it's self or partner stimulated orgasms, it sets off pretty much every part of the brain. Motor, sensory motor integration, single motor, primary motor. So this is really a lot of science is now coming out with real hard and fast studies about how sex is completely connected to your mental and physical overall well-being and good health. It's outside of sleep, anxiety, depression. It gives you a distraction for something to do, right? It helps you to kind of escape from the stress, right? By doing something else. It also, I'll tell you that later, because that's something interesting. But it's also lightweight exercise. So it also kind of gets your body in movement. And it also helps you to gain agency over the body through masturbation, right? So you get a chance to increase what's called proprioception, like an identification of the body in space and time. And so it also helps you to identify what your needs are. You can communicate that to your partner, what you really need. It's also been scientifically, in terms of studies, associated with better body image, is to do mindful masturbation and to understand what your body needs and wants. So that's just some of the very many mental and sometimes in physical benefits of sex.
Absolutely. How can struggling with my mental health impact my sex drive or libido? You can totally expand on libido if you need to.
Yeah, well, it goes back to that whole anxiety and depression piece, right? Um, Understanding that the sex part, oftentimes when people think of sex, they think of the end game, which is the orgasm, right? But that's not the end game, right? So if you're jumping over into the end game, of course you're going to be stressful because sex, you forget that sex is about clumsiness and awkwardness sometimes and fun and, and titillation. And, you forget all of those things in jumping over into the end game. So settling and being more intimate, breathing with your partner, right? Just having synchronized breathing or just getting naked and hugging each other, right? Everything from just sitting and talking about some random thing, right? So building that intimacy can be very helpful, especially when anxiety and depression and things like that oftentimes take you off the game of sex. It can lower your libido. It can actually make you feel like you don't want that. But that's when you pull in things like intimacy, tickling your partner, touching your partner, just having like non-sexual touch, right? And also self-touch, right? When we do this, there's a thing in self-compassion circles, which we talk about and oxytocin is also good for that too, that self-compassion piece. We talk about compassionate touch where you place one hand on your chest and the other one on your navel, over your navel, on your belly. And how intimate that can be for yourself in doing your own self-touch. So those things are all very important when you're feeling like overwhelmed and maybe sex is not where you're going to go. It doesn't have to be where you need to go. It's the whole point of that. There are things that you can definitely do to be more intimate and bring that forth.
I was wondering if I could ask you, Dr. Flint, you kind of have touched on this in your first question and answering your second question of how masturbation can be a form of self-soothing, of self-love, of self-care, and that it can help to build intimacy and improve our feelings of mental wellness and calm. So could you maybe talk a little bit on, especially since many of us are quarantining and are not with our partners or not exploring partner intimacy, could you talk about building self-intimacy more, or how we can become more intimate with ourselves, whether sexual or otherwise, during this time?
Yes, thank you for that. Well, the first part starts with understanding your body, right? In sex positivity circles, we talk about everybody has a right to have that understanding. Everybody has a right to that knowledge, to being able to understanding that. If you are, say, I don't know anything about any of this, I just know I just want to try it, right? So here's the short and sweet of it is just stop, sit still, and see what happens in your body. If the body is saying anything to you, if there's a tense point, if there's something that is itching, if there's something that's pulling. So the first thing is to start slow and give yourself a lot of love and compassion around it, right? So it may feel awkward at first. And I always say it feels awkward because we're always putting output. It's always an output situation, especially for those who are female identified. So it's always this output, right? But the input, when you start to kind of turn that around and say, okay, let me give myself some of this love, it starts to feel different. So first start to identify what your body is feeling on the inside, outside of your head. So we have this thing that we say, getting out of our heads and into our bodies, right? And that's real. And moving up to what's called mindful masturbation is really about first being intimate with the self first. So kind of touching spaces on yourself, feeling the texture of your hand rubbing your arm, right? Or rubbing your face. Don't put your hands in your face, but rubbing your neck maybe, right? Don't do that. Before COVID, it would have been touching your face. So that part. But just giving yourself that gentle rub, right? Just to see, and just breathing and seeing how it feels, like going very slow, right? And even connecting to the awkwardness of it. So if your body feels like, oh, this feels weird. Okay, so what feels weird about it? Let's get really close to that. Let's get intimate with that feeling and that what you're feeling there, right? And moving into other spaces in the body so that you feel touch. How do I feel in response to the touch? Touch here. How do I feel in response to the touch? What is it? What's coming up inside of me? Now, I will say this. Sometimes this is contraindicated for people who have certain traumas, because you don't want to really go there because it could trigger a lot. So we're talking about those people who can contain that and who can handle that. But generally going over the body and through the body, even movement of the body. You know, does the body want to move right now? Okay, well, let me just do that. Let me move it then, you know, and then let me do a sensual dance even with it. So it's really about your relationship to everything in your body, what the body can do, what the body can sense, what the body can feel.
And I think there's a piece there, you know, this idea of releasing the end game,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's self-pleasure or pleasuring someone else, that it's more about the process and being very patient with that process. If you have it related to yourself in that intimate way, if you your sexual life has been cut off at the neck, that you want to be very patient with the awkwardness and all the silly parts that come along with it, and try to release the focus on the outcome.
Right. That is so real. If we could just release that part, right? The end,
which is really hard for most of us, right? We're very achievement oriented.
Socialized to.
Yeah, we're socialized to, like, what's the goal? What am I supposed to, you know, what's supposed to be the happy ending that happens here?
Right.
And
right, exactly.
That's not the idea. The idea is the happy ending will come or it won't, and you're going to just be a part of this process and be very present and mindful.
Yes. And giving yourself love and compassion around it. That's the whole piece. And that's so true, Shawna, because that helps with that whole try not to rush to the end game. Like, just make it a game with yourself. Like, how long can I contain this without actually orgasming, right? And if you read people like Natalie Anger's book, I think I mentioned it once to you, Jennifer, the Woman in Intimate Geography, and how she talks about, you know, these different pieces in the most remarkable prose. It's about, and she has a whole chapter on the clitoris, right? And Sophia Wallace is another scholar of that. There's another young woman, Dr. Dutton, out of Atlanta, Dr. Stacy Dutton. And they were actually going to present their new research on the clitoris at South by Southwest, but COVID happened. So, but I know, right? So we're learning all of this new stuff. There's studies being done about how there was a study done by Loudner, this Loudner and et al. That actually talked about how sex every night, they put mice through the study and had them have sexual activity every night for 14 days, every day for 14 days. And they found these kind of this hippocampal regeneration happening. So things are happening in hippocampus is responsible for anxiety regulation and memory. And so there are all these pieces that are happening through the sexual act in the brain that the brain is responding to, and in some pretty great ways. And so to have these, like, literally cell regrowth is happening, right, is really amazing. It's just an amazing piece. So, but, you know, back to the end game, it's not always about that, but the end game actually is also very healthy.
So can we talk about what healthy sex should look like in regards to our mental health?
You want to take that on, Shawna?
You're the expert, Dr. Flint.
Okay. So, well, another piece I think is contextual because there's also people may consider BDSM not being healthy sex. However, it's been shown that it actually helps couples to bond better. And people who engage in BDSM, studies have shown that they actually have a better self-concept and a better and improved self-confidence. So while some people might think, oh, kinky, ooh, I don't know. But, you know, if done in a manner that is safe for everyone, then it actually improves some self-concepts for people. And also couple bonding. But so that to me makes it kind of contextual because some people don't consider that safe. But I think what it would look like is to make sure that both people are safe in it emotionally, physically, bringing your tools to the table like condoms, right? So because it all goes down to that. And so being able to make sure that when you emerge from it, you feel empowered in the act and you feel that you have been honored in that act, no matter who you are.
Yeah, I think it takes a level of trust.
Yes.
A very deep level of trust and communication. And it doesn't have to be, you know, a 2-hour conversation, right? It can be a easy exchange around consent or what each other wants. It's a continual conversation, I think, during sex, you know, to be able to talk about what's happening or what each other might need. But that at the baseline for it to feel healthy for all people involved, there has to be trust.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That made me think of something because I think so much of good sex, healthy sex, safe sex comes back to, and whatever your individual definition of that is, of course, comes down to communication, like both self-talk, so the way you talk to yourself, but also the way that you talk to your partners, and the things that you're willing to share. And so do y'all have any advice, and this could be more general for talking about challenging things or intimate things, but particularly around sex, for having maybe more conversations that might feel embarrassing or awkward or exciting or scary or whatever that does? Like, how do we kind of learn how to talk to our partners about things that might not come naturally right away, or talk to ourselves about those things as well?
I think in general, the first step is to get comfortable with discomfort. You know, we're a pretty comfortable society, and so that feeling of awkwardness or embarrassment we try to avoid. Mm-hmm. Avoidance feels pretty uncomfortable too. So if you're going to be uncomfortable, no matter how you go about it, how about being genuine and authentic and just starting the conversation? And like most things that cause us anxiety or stress, it's usually just the starting that's the hardest part. And once the conversation begins, then it doesn't feel quite as awkward. Mm-hmm. So I think just a general acceptance that this might be a little bit uncomfortable, but I think it's still valuable and worth doing, is good across the board when you're trying to tackle difficult things, but particularly when you're trying to talk about sex.
Yeah, I agree. I think that even in the conversation, taking a breath and saying, this is going to be awkward. Right?
No, get ready.
you know, being able to have that type of authenticity, you know, is oftentimes, you see how that just kind of broke the ice and everybody laughed, right? And so it doesn't feel so bad, right? It's like, okay, well, let's see, you know, just let's see where this goes, right? Because it will be. Or you can practice on yourself in the mirror, you know. Oftentimes that's another awkward space for people. Its input is not comfortable because we've been so socialized for output. So it's really about starting an exercise without a destination, knowing that it is a journey of input, right? So looking in that mirror, those mirror neurons taking place. They're actually mirror neurons where you are looking at someone. That's one thing that mammals are able to do, right? Is being able to socially engage. So you can practice on yourself first if you need to do that, and say, you know, okay, I'm going to talk to myself about this. It feels awkward, you know, and then talk to your partner and say, you know, this feels kind of awkward for me, but I really need to share it, right? And if that is a partner that you can trust, then that should go fairly well for you. So Shawna, what Shawna said about trust, that word needs to be like in neon lights.
And the way you kind of build trust is by broaching those uncomfortable topics. Mm-hmm. And you see how that goes, right? Trust is built with trustworthy behavior over time. So every time you just
say that
step
again,
out.
Girl, say it again.
The people in the back.
Yeah. Trust is built with trustworthy behavior over time. So if you step outside your comfort zone for a moment and your partner can hear that, then you've established a little bit more trust. Mm-hmm. And every time you do it, you're growing that trust, because they show you that they can laugh with you at the awkwardness, or they can hear you when you talk about something really serious or difficult. And then you're a little bit more comfortable every time you need to do that. And they are as well. And it becomes really mutual in that communication.
Yeah. Ditto that.
How about one more question, Chelsea?
Absolutely. So just talking about healthy relationships a little bit more, and intimacy. What are your thoughts? Do you think a relationship can survive without intimacy?
Scientifically, no. No, not without, it can survive. No, not without intimacy. Just because you need that. Human beings need interconnectedness. We're hardwired for it. And if we don't get it, it does impact our health, our well-being, emotionally, mentally, physically. It really does. We need to get those hormones going, released, in order to be healthy. So my answer to that is no.
And do you think that that's, sorry, do you think that that's do you think that like relationships can be emotionally intimate, but not maybe physically intimate, right, and exactly, still provide that same kind of structure and, mm-hmm, and sustenance? Yeah,
exactly. And they need, mm-hmm, to be. I think part of what happens even in the world today is that we're not intimate enough in our relationships, because if we're intimate, it's read as something else, right? Mm-hmm. And so people hide and they conceal their feelings, their true feelings, right? Or they don't put them forth because they don't want to be vulnerable to that. And what's missed is these kind of mutual growth fostering relationships. We don't get to help each other grow. We don't get to engage in trustworthy behavior over time. I'm going to steal that, girl. I love it. But we don't get to do that. And when we don't get to do that, we don't really get to trigger our internal mechanisms in our body, mind, spirit, that really help us to be well.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I think it is possible to have an emotionally intimate relationship without physical intimacy.
Absolutely.
I think physical intimacy is much more challenging without emotional intimacy. So for that physical intimacy to really be fulfilling and healthy, I think it almost has to have, I hate to say anything absolute, but it almost has to have that emotional intimacy. But certainly I can think of emotionally intimate relationships in my life that didn't have physical intimacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes the intimacy is greater when there's, mm-hmm, not the physical, when there's, mm-hmm, not an expectation of a physical intimacy, mm-hmm, right? It can be really profound and deep and transcending to have that emotional connection with someone that you don't necessarily have. I mean, I can think about 2 or 3 of my girlfriends that I have a deep emotional relationship with, right? That I am just, when I think of them, I just flutter because they're just great people. I love them, right? But we're not physically intimate. These are my girls, like, you know, but so it is possible to have that, but you have to be ready to be vulnerable to that. So
I want to make sure all the folks that have logged in have a chance to ask any of their questions. So anyone who's on with us live right now, if you want to submit a question, they are anonymous. So you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Maybe while we're waiting for any of those to come in, any last kind of words of wisdom from any of you for people who've tuned in to think about as they maybe want to deepen their level of intimacy in their sexual relationships? Any ideas or thoughts in that regard?
I think that I would encourage, especially our students, to explore some of the different programming that we're going to have next year. And I know that that's such a administrator thing to say, but we are going to really try to create spaces where people can really talk about sex, and in a destigmatized, really sex positive way, and where we can be honest with each other or get our questions answered or learn new skills, whether that be like how to safely use sex toys and keep them clean and with the correct lubricants and things like that, to, how do we build intimacy within our platonic relationships? We want to continue having those conversations. And so I definitely encourage you to keep a lookout for what we'll be doing in the coming months, but to also give us feedback or missing something. If there's something you really want to talk about, let one of us know, because we are totally available and ready for some feedback and excited for it if you have.
Yeah. And likewise, please tap in. You can reach out to, I think I speak for the both of us, to any one of us at any time if you need any further articles or anything about what we just talked about today. I don't know if you saw us out when we showed up for Sex Fest this past few months ago, I think, and we did an intimacy exercise. And it was really interesting. I took a ton of pictures, but it was very interesting to do. Chelsea, you weren't here, so I'll just share that we had people do what's called a 1-minute gaze. It was kind of a takeoff of Maria Abramovich's work that she did with the thing in the museum in New York. But we had people sit, she had people sit for longer, but we had people sit in front of each other and just look at each other for 1 minute, for 60 seconds. And I can tell you, it was a trip to watch. And it was a trip for them people were like, that's the longest minute of my life. And they loved it. I mean, it started off with people who were like, what are you doing? And then people started asking strangers to come do it with them. It was pretty interesting. So I definitely would be open to continuing that.
More. Yeah, for sure. It was so cool to watch, Chelsea.
Yeah.
The only thing I would want to say is that May 28th is International Masturbation Day. So just highly want to push that out there.
Mark it on your calendars.
Right.
Make a plan.
Yes. Self-love.
Right.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just to put up the resources that we have at CAPS. And while I'm doing that, I'll say, for my part that, as we've talked about, so much of sex and the way it interacts with mental health is related to trust and vulnerability. And if you're hearing that and thinking, I can't do it, I can't do that, then, therapy is another place to come and really kind of do that self-exploration to find out maybe where you're blocked or where the barriers are for you. These are some of the services that we're offering through CAPS right now. We still have our emergency walk-in hours available Monday through Friday, 12 to 4 at the Uptown CAPS Clinic. And if you are in the state of Louisiana, we are also able to take new clients on for telehealth services. So if you are interested in exploring the option of therapy right now, you can call the main CAPS number, which is that 314-2277 number, to be scheduled with a consultation with one of our staff. You do have to be in the state of Louisiana. If you're not in Louisiana and you're interested in getting into therapy, you can contact our care coordinator. that same number, or her email is carecoordinator@tulane.edu, and she can help you find someone wherever you are to go ahead and get started on that journey. The line is still available, which is our 24-hour day hotline that you can call or text if you're in some distress and just need someone to talk to in the moment. It's a really good resource. They are mental health clinicians on the other end of that line. And then there's a couple of links posted here for some suggestions and some ideas for how to cope during a pandemic, because that's affecting all of us and all of our well-being. I usually try to close with something cute and light, and since we were talking about intimacy, I thought I'd share these elephants who seem to like each other a lot.
My
They're
heart.
sweet.
Elephants are my favorite.
Are they?
Yeah, they're my favorite.
They're pretty fascinating creatures. So.
They're amazing. They're absolutely amazing.
Well, I just want to thank all of you for being here with us. This has been such a great conversation. It could go on. I wish we had hours. And maybe there's some programming in the future where there's more time, because I think we've got so many resources both at the well and in CAPS. We've got such expertise here on our staff that I think we can continue to provide these sorts of events and conversations for our community to help create that sex positive culture that we want to see at Tulane. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you and invite everyone who's tuned in to join us next Wednesday for another episode of Wellbeing Wednesdays, and we will see you then.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.